Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Following the Trends 2019, presented by CIDM and DCL. My name is Marianne Callahana. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at DCL, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please write your questions in the questions dialog box. Feel free to submit questions as they come to mind. If we do not have time to answer everything, we will get in touch with you personally after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sure to send a link to everyone after the broadcast. Also, the complete list of charts and graphs related to this survey are available from the DCL website by navigating to dclab.com/resources/surveys. For the past 7 years, CIDM and DCL asked managers, information architects, writers, training developers, and others how they are addressing the challenges of meeting customer information needs. This webinar reviews the trends we've seen over the years. Next slide, please. Recently, MIT Sloan Management Review and Cognizant completed their own global survey on the future of leadership in the digital economy. The results revealed that only 12% of respondents strongly agreed that their organization's leaders had the right mindset, and a scant 9% strongly agreed that their leaders had the proper skills to compete effectively in the new economy. It is our hope that the findings we present to you today help inform decisions your organization can implement to thrive in today's digital world. Next slide, please. So if you just joined us, please know that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording once it's available. Also, we encourage you to submit any questions in the GoToWebinar question dialog box. And now I am thrilled to introduce two well-known and respected experts from the information management industry, Mark Gross, President of DCL, and Dawn Stevens, President and Director of CIDM. They will walk us through the results of the 2019 Trends Survey. Dawn?
All right, thank you, Marianne. And hello, everybody. This is Dawn, and Mark is going to chime in as he sees fit as we go through these slides. So, as always, we want to just start by setting the stage of who are the people who participated in this survey? How do they represent us? Can we really believe what we're hearing? Is this truly a trend? So we want to give you the data of who participated. So as you can see here, to start with, we had 261 respondents this year, and the majority of those, about half of them, a little more than half, identify themselves as writers. So we're going to hear a lot about what they are currently doing, what they're being asked to do, and what they're hearing is changing in their own companies. And then we see, as it continues down, that we do have a good portion of managers also participating, slightly less than the writers, but almost 40% of the people also identify as or identify as a manager in one way or another. So they might also have good vision about what they are planning to do. So that's a good proportion to draw trends from. And then you can see as it continues to go down, we have some representation from many other job titles. What we have found in some other surveys that we have done is that the whole job title piece is something that people are struggling with. Am I a writer? Am I an information architect? Am I a content strategist? So when we look at all these, we can pretty much see that they're all valid people to be participating in this study, and they all probably have very similar roles, certainly a few different responsibilities, but certainly they know what they're being asked to do and what is coming up as they plan for the next several years.
I would point out also that these are really, a lot of this is people who are hands-on in the industry, so the people who are actually working with this day to day. And so I think, that gives it a certain currency to the information we're getting here.
Absolutely. In terms of the industries that they are representing, this is our kind of typical breakdown that we see in this survey, is that we're reaching mostly the majority of people in some kind of quote-unquote technology industry, being really things like software documentation, telecommunications, things like that, that would be kind of more the technology aspect, and so that's the majority of people. You can see our second group is industry, and that's representing things like our heavy industries, heavy equipment manufacturing, pumps, water treatment plants, those types of things are all classified into the industry area. And then you can see it goes down from there. We are highlighting also the life sciences, so from the medical industry, both software, hardware, for the life sciences as well. But the majority really being in that technology phase of things. So, you might see some of the results skewed more towards that of our certain things, maybe more applicable to people who are writing that type of documentation. You're going to see maybe a little higher trend on those items. And I think one thing that we can say from the 7 years of attendance of surveys is that the more things change, the more things stay the same. So what are these people doing? What kinds of content are they creating? What we see here is the first few are things that have always been the top of the things that people are creating. So any kind of user manual, whether that's user guides or administration guides, configuration guides, installation, etc. All of those types of traditional documents are still, most of us are creating these. Release notes also very popular, and help still remains very popular. So these are the things that we would expect everybody to be creating. Some of the exciting things that we're seeing, though, is take a look at that 35% for UI and UX strings. This is our biggest change in the trends this year. It rose by, I think, another 5% of people doing it, from 30 to 35%, in charge of the things that are appearing on your screen, on the software screen. So the names of the fields, the names of the dialog boxes, any text that appears on the screen at all is starting to be more and more owned by the people who are experts in the language, who are advocates for the users, who are really thinking about how can we best communicate. And so the interfaces hopefully are improving as a result of that. And this, I think, follows some of the trends that we've seen in other surveys too, of where do people live, where does our technical communication department live, and we've been seeing a move to user experience umbrellas for that. And so I think this is reflecting that as well. But I think that's very exciting to see that increase as we go year after year. This was something that we didn't see at all, 7 years ago, and so I think it's an exciting thing. Holding fairly steady are things like videos. We're going to take a look at videos in a little bit more detail as we go along, but we do still have a good proportion of teams are creating video content. And even a little bit as we scan down the list, things like training materials and in those kind of combined documentation and training teams, they're represented in the people who responded. So we asked also, what are you working in? And this also has pretty much remained fairly consistent as we have gone year after year, with the XML authoring continuing to grow a little bit each year. But we see, people mostly are in some kind of an XML form with a secondary aspect of Microsoft Word as well. And of course, these numbers add up to more than 100. People are using more than one thing, and we're going to take a look at that in just a second as well. The interesting thing on this one is to just keep track year after year of Markdown. We see Markdown right here at 18%. Last year it was at 12%. So this is another big trend that we're seeing, is that increase of interest in people using Markdown. It kind of made a splash, a big growth last year, and it continued that growth again this year. So as people, as the documentation teams need to work more and more with their engineers who are used to working in Markdown, or perhaps wikis, which we also see there at about the same percentage. This is something that the teams are now taking on themselves as well, of we need to be writing in Markdown or providing our content in a wiki or something like that. So I think we're going to see that continuing to grow year after year as well. But largely we see that the XML author, and still surprisingly an awful lot of Word. So if we look at it more from the what is your primary tool, since that last screen showed the full percentages adding up to more than 100, people are using a lot more than one tool. We want to say, well, which one are you using as your primary tool? And the milestone that happened this year is we moved from 3 times as likely to be using an XML authoring tool as your primary to 4 times as likely. So we see that the primary XML author tool is 42% here, Word being the second one at 10%. So 4 times now as likely to be using an XML author of some kind as the primary tool. So this is steady and consistent growth that really reflects the importance that people are seeing for structured content, for reuse, and all those things that we can get from XML.
Yeah, I think this is really the very telling chart over here. The other one's sort of because of multiple users, but here the fact that so many people that the steady movement to XML, I think, is pretty important here, and also even on FrameMaker, it's this as a primary tool, structured FrameMaker has become predominant over here. So it's still not quite where it is, but so you've got structured formats has really become the predominant way people are working with things. I'm surprised Word is that big a piece of it still, but it's as a primary tool. But this has really been a major move, I think, over the last few years.
Yeah, and let's look at that a little bit. You mentioned FrameMaker there, the structured FrameMaker at 5% versus the unstructured FrameMaker at 3% is another switch that has happened over the last year. Is up to this point in the previous 6 years, unstructured FrameMaker was the predominant of those two systems of being the primary tool, and that has switched this year to the structured forms. So again, I think just as you're saying, Mark, that these are very telling that people are continuing to move to structured content year over year. We've got one more chart to just take a look at from that authoring tool perspective in terms of the spread. We've chosen a few of the different tools to show you of how many people who reported if they were using one of these things that it was their primary tool versus their secondary tool and so forth. So you can see if you're using an XML editor, it is almost certainly the primary tool that you're using, with very minor secondary and tertiary roles. Basically, if you've committed to some kind of an XML editor, whether that is a standard that's the standard, the DocBook standard, S1000D, whatever, your homegrown XML, whatever it is, the editor that you're using, that's going to be where you're primarily working. Versus if we look at the other tools, if people are using one of these other tools, we see a stronger mix here, that there's potentially a lot of people in transition, if you will, that they're not as likely to have whether it's structured FrameMaker or unstructured FrameMaker, or in these cases Markdown or Word as their primary. It's just part of the mix, and they've got other things that they're doing as well. And so we can see that these are much more evenly distributed. But structured FrameMaker, as we've been talking about with the trend towards structure, is almost now at a 50% likelihood that if you're using structured FrameMaker, it's your primary tool. Whereas, you know, Word, even though it's very popular, we've got so many people who are still reporting that they're using it. It's very likely that they're not using it as their primary. Only 26% are still reporting it as primary. But it is still a good, you know, secondary tool for, you know, a variety of things that people are creating. And then we look at Markdown here, and Markdown, you know, again, pretty even distribution, but look at that point that it's a secondary tool here now. If you're using Markdown, it's probably secondary. My guess is it's probably secondary to your XML editor. But those things are starting to really work hand in hand. Of course, that's one of the important things as we watch the standard, the lightweight data standard, which will help us, you know, merge data and Markdown together. I think that's going to be an important thing to people who are in this situation where they're using that combination of authoring tools or standards. All right, so those are the tools. We also asked about the content management of, okay, so if you are in, you know, the majority of people are in XML, how are you tracking all of that content? You know, traditionally, the XML content tends to mean that you've got a lot more files to keep track of, a lot of different relationships and so forth. How are people tracking that content? And we see here that we've got not quite 44% reporting that they're in a component content management system. And I still find that Mark and I were talking yesterday when we were looking at some of these pieces of data, that this is still a bit of a surprise to us that the number is so low, that we're at, you know, 43.5% in a component content management system, but 86% are saying that they're using an XML tool as their primary tool. That seems to be a slight mismatch, and that's not to say that you can't be successful using an XML solution in a source control system or in these other types of solutions, but oftentimes that takes a lot more discipline, and you know, we would expect to potentially see this number as a higher number of people in a component content management system. But go ahead, Mark.
And I was also thinking that really, I mean, if you're in data or component type of system, you're more likely to be using component content management systems. But if you're using XML more as to do different things, you can get away without it. So that might skew some of the numbers also, depending on what various people were doing. But I think getting these kind of systems in is probably the big hump to get over in order to be able to use these component type systems more effectively. So that's probably the big hump over here. But that number is higher, I think we pointed out, than last year, right?
Yes, very slight, up from 39 to 43 or 44. Yeah. So yeah, just a little bit. The other interesting thing here, of course, the observant person will be, those numbers add up to more than 100 as well, meaning people are using more than one system. And what we found out here, we don't have a separate slide for it, but that if you're using a component content management system, again, that's very likely. About 62% of people who said they were using a CCMS said that's the only thing they're using. So all their content, all their resources and so forth are being stored in that system. You know, if they've invested in that, they're definitely using it for, you know, all of their content management. Whereas in these other systems, they may be in a variety of different things. Well, some of the stuff is in Git, some of it's just on a file server somewhere, and those types of things. They're using a combination. They're more likely to be using a combination if they're not in a component content management system. All right, so now, you know, comes some of the interesting things to talk about, predictions and so forth. So since we've been doing the survey, as Marianne said, for 7 years, we have a lot of data, and we have always asked the question about where do you think we're going to be in 3 years? And so we're showing you the last for not last year's, because last year's isn't going to hit now, but we're showing you 2014 through 2017 predictions, right? What did people think they were going to be doing 5 years ago, 2 years ago, and so forth? And you know, we can see here this expectation, and if we point out, like, dynamic publishing wasn't even on the horizon in 2014, but when we started asking about it, you know, big predictions that we're going to be using dynamic publishing for a, you know, 40 to 50% of our content. We're going to expect that our print, you know, look at this yellow number from 2 years ago, that print was only going to represent slightly over 20% of our content, that other things were going to take the place there. So we see all these different predictions. We can see that we've kind of dialed back. In 2017, things started to really dial back. We were starting to see these trends of everything that we thought was going to be hot, you know, in that high 50% and so forth, wasn't coming in as fast. And so we started to dial that back a little bit, except for really HTML was the only one, and a little bit of dynamic publishing in 2017 that we thought might, you know, grow faster. But let's now not spend a lot of time on what did we just predict. Let's compare it to our actuals. So this is now, the red line is the actual survey of people reporting, are we doing this, and what percentage of our content is in this type of output. So we see, you know, the predictions, we're still pretty optimistic, right? If we look at something like dynamic delivery, where we're like, oh yeah, we need it, we're going to go towards it, and so forth, and yet we're less than halfway to where we were predicting ourselves to be 2, 3, 4 years ago. The same true for things like mobile apps and video, where we've been expecting for years and years for that to take off. Now, last year we dialed back on video, and so we're almost at that point right there. But largely, you know, we've had in these kind of newer or less common formats, we've had a lot of expectation that the growth was going to be there. Now, in our core competency here, the electronic PDFs, the HTML, the help, and to a certain extent the print, we're a little bit more in line with our expectations. So let's take a look at that print. I think we all, it seems to be a goal of the industry itself to let's eliminate the print and not print as many things, give people more, either just the electronic PDFs and not print at all, or preferably more content in portals, HTML websites with or without dynamic delivery. And it has, look, it has started to go down, and we're now, you know, meeting the expectations of 2015, 2016. We're beating those expectations, but you know, the 2017, you know, was predicting just a little bit less than where we are right now. So print is still there, but I think it's interesting to see that it is starting to back down and meet more of our expectations in that area.
I think print is really getting. I mean, it's 30% now. I mean, it's people are just getting used to printing less, I think. PDF is still way up there, so I think that's where the trade-off has been between dynamic delivery and PDF, right? I mean, not exactly, but PDF is still people are comfortable with, and so it's staying a lot longer. But information is being transmitted on websites now. You can see that from here.
Yep.
That's expectation. It's in actuality. The big surprise, I think, is the video, which we thought was really going to be, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that was going to take over the world, and it's really still, in actuality, under 20%, which I think is and mobile apps also. And I think we talked about yesterday about the possibility. I mean, it may be that as websites are getting better, sort of the need for a mobile app may not be as much. I mean, as dynamic kinds of deliveries will get better. But Who knows? I think people are just used to not having too many. I think people have too many apps on their phones now, so they're a little worried about it.
Yep.
Mark and Dawn, could you take a moment and we're getting a few questions. It would be helpful if perhaps you could define and speak to dynamic delivery, what that means, define LMS for our listeners.
Sure, absolutely. So, what we're meaning by dynamic delivery is really it builds when the user is looking at it. So, if you've got your XML content, your content is conditionalized for certain types of people or for certain products. It has variables that are based on, a particular product or those types of things. That content hasn't been pre-built and loaded onto the HTML or onto your website. It is actually sitting in its raw native form. And when a user requests that information, what we know about the user, what we know about the search choices, the facets or words that they've chosen in their search, what we know about that helps set those conditions, those keys, and so forth, so that content is being built in real time, specifically for that particular person who's looking at the content. So that gives us a lot of options for more personalized experience for the user. LMS is from our learning folks in particular. It is a learning management system. So are we delivering training courses, that type of material in some kind of a system where people are taking the course, being tracked that they're taking that course, potentially getting grades and all sorts of things like that, of completion, at least completion, not maybe grades, but some kind of completion statistics that they have indeed viewed the content and those types of things. That's what a learning management system does.
Right, and it is instructive that it was expected to be a much bigger piece of it, and it's still relatively small. I think that there's a hump to bringing in an LMS also, so that's probably part of the reason for that. Yep,
absolutely, it's a completely separate tool, and if you, especially the people who are part of our surveys, if they're not developing training content, they're not really interested in that, and so they're not doing anything, which is why we see maybe the smaller numbers is that the people who are doing training was I can't remember exactly, but about mid 20% were people who were working in training as well. Let's go to the next slide, which is this exact same information, but now we're going to have one more bar, which is, okay, this year, what are we predicting for 2022? So the red line remains the same. This is what we said we're currently doing. And then this is the green line now is what the people in the survey said. This is what we expect to be doing in 3 years. So look at our big change, which is that top one, that dynamic publishing that I just defined here. This is where people are expecting to really be going, to be increasing. Maybe they're already on their websites. They already have content on their website. It's static content right now, and of course we see that people continue to expect that they're going to be doing just the website, but now that website's going to potentially be enhanced with this dynamic publishing piece of it, so that we can provide more of that customized experience to our individual users, giving them exactly what they want, even potentially giving them the ability to create their own PDFs and so forth, select the topics that they are interested in, put them in their own separate custom book and create that. That would be part of dynamic publishing as well. So there's a lot of potential here, and it looks like we see that potential and we expect to be going in that direction. Now, the caution, of course, is that the green line is still in line with the yellow and the blue line as well. So we've been predicting this now for 4 years, since 2015. Our actuals are definitely behind our predictions. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes on in future years, how we track to this, but that's definitely where our expectation is. Otherwise, really from an expectation perspective, we are seeing that things like print, we continue to think we're going to do less of that, less of PDF in favor of our websites and our dynamic publishing. And We see a little bit of growth there in embedded user assistance as well. What's interesting is also here, though, is that video piece. It's actually predicted at less than the actuals. So I don't know whether that's people are getting rid of their video, or they're not getting the responses that they expect. But this is another trend that I think is something that we're going to have to continue to look at going forward, of what is it about video. And the reason that we're so interested in video is what we hear from the audience, the potential audience of as they would continue to grow older, but we get the Google generation, we get all the younger people are part of our audience now. There's lots of studies out there that are saying that they're going to choose a video over anything else. If they do a search on Google and they see a video choice, that's what they're choosing to see for instructions. And yet we're seeing our predictions are falling off on that, not expecting to have more than, or very little more than 10% of our content in video format. And that seems to be a mismatch with what we're hearing about the audience.
I'm wondering just one thing I might be curious also. I just it was your responsibility for video being moved to other places. I mean,
right. I think that's a possibility.
And so I would have thought that whatever communications methods are being used to deal, to communicate with a customer, is going to be in this group, but it may be videos sort of setting up its own little shop someplace. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility as well. And then take a look at mobile apps too. This is another one of those big line jumps from actuals to what we predict in 3 years. And again, to reiterate kind of what Mark was saying a little bit earlier, this is another thing that will be interesting, because our initial thought as to, well, why aren't mobile apps as high as we thought, was that potentially there really isn't a need for it. The idea of the mobile app being that downloadable thing, it's the content isn't, the people aren't viewing it on the website live, they're downloading it into an app. Obviously they have then the need of, whenever they're in a Wi-Fi situation where they can get a new download, that maybe it's the app is self-updating and so forth with any new content that we've made available. But we haven't been doing much of it, because we thought, well, maybe people actually have better access to websites and performance is good enough and so forth, that maybe the mobile apps aren't needed. And yet we see this predicted jump, still less than what the last few years are, but we're still seeing that we expect that number to be higher than what it actually is. And again, well, that's something we're just going to need to continue to track here, but it's definitely one of those big ones that's way off of where we currently are. And so talking about the mobile app strategy, let's just talk about mobile in general. We asked some questions about, well, what is your mobile strategy? We see here the mobile apps is a very, very small percentage of people's overall strategy. Largely what people are doing in terms of putting their content onto a mobile device is basically saying, well, we're going to make our website responsive, right? 49% said we're at least taking that content that's on our website, we're putting in the breakpoints and those types of things that are necessary to make the content more viewable in mobile device. But right behind it, we've got the people saying, well, we're not designing the content for mobile at all. So there's still a big, I think, area here in mobile strategy of what do we do with it. But very few people are doing some kind of mobile specific website or something like that. They're still trying to figure out how can we take that the exact same content and make it readable and viewable on a mobile device. Because what we see in that bottom thing is that 78% of the people are saying we're putting exactly the same content on mobile. We're not keeping any of it. We're not redesigning or rewriting content to make it a mobile first type of strategy. Only we see that 21% is saying, well, maybe there is a little less than we should be showing if you're on a mobile device. But for the most part, we've got the majority of people looking at, we need to include the exact same information regardless of the device you're looking at it. And our solution right now, if we have one, is really, we're going to make it responsive. So I think we've got some areas here to really be looking at, and maybe that growth that we saw, people predicting the mobile apps, is one of those areas that people are looking at. Another thing that I haven't been highlighting on any of the graphs so far, but we started looking at social media a few years ago of, is it something that impacts us as technical communication professionals? Are we using social media to communicate with our customers and so forth? And what we have seen really as an overall trend is this big piece. The majority of people in technical communications, we're not using it. We're not using social media to talk to our customers. Now, this was a significant jump from last year, but we changed the question. So we had before just asked, are you using social media in any way? And we had more like 40% said we don't use it. But when we specifically changed the question to say, are you using social media to communicate to your customers? This is where it jumped back, up to 69%. So it's not really, it doesn't seem to be a tool that's catching on for us from a technical communication perspective. Those people who are using it, you see we're doing things like announcing new content releases or directing users to specific content. Oftentimes though, we were getting comments from the people in the survey saying, actually marketing's really doing that, but it's about our content or something like that, that they're not necessarily in charge of a social media channel themselves. From that social media channel, you can see the distribution that the ones that they might contribute to, if they are contributing to social media at all, largely is this discussion forum area, and then this kind of big other that doesn't really tell us a lot, but this is where it was more write-in of various things that maybe the marketing people were doing and so forth. So we as technical communicators might be monitoring or contributing to discussion forums. Maybe we're writing some blogs. But the rest of these kind of traditional social media platforms you see used much less. And that YouTube number corresponds pretty closely to the people who are producing in video. So very likely, if you're producing video content, you've got a YouTube channel for it. And those probably have a direct correspondence.
And I'm wondering that the places where, especially in a survey discussion forums, would be the place where I would expect to see, social media. I would expect people to be using it. And again, it may not be coming out of the documentation areas, and may be coming out of engineers answering questions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe that's also something that should be looked into, of, whether that needs to be pulled in closer to the people who are actually documenting and putting things together.
Yeah, actually, it's one of those things that I, in many of my classes that I teach it, when we talk about access to users and technical communication professionals say, oh, we're not allowed to talk to the users. The marketing people or the sales people control access to the users, and they're not allowed to talk to them. This is one of the areas that I say, well, then go to these discussion forums, see what the users are posting on there. How do they talk about things? Can you learn about your users from the discussion forums? So I think it's, social media certainly is a good tool for us to maybe learn more about our users, even if we're not necessarily pushing our content there. Another trend that we continue to see really no movement on here is this question of, do we let our customers contribute content? So this whole idea of curated content, letting customers either edit or add comments to, or some kind of form of user-generated content on our website. Do we allow it? Vast majority, nope. Customers are not contributing content. They might provide feedback, but that feedback's not viewable per se by anybody else. So this question has to do with that. Can what the customers say be viewed by other customers. And so you see, most people know, and then the rest of this is really, well, if we do let it be there, they can only add comments to existing content. They can't create anything new. And in many cases, the content has to be reviewed by the experts at the company before it's allowed to be shown as well. So very small.
It's sort of related. It's a little bit related to the previous question. I think it just shows that the attitude is still not there to be socializing information back and forth. This is really just another aspect of social media. Of do you let people contribute on your website? So I think just people are just not that comfortable with that open, wild west mentality yet.
Yep, exactly. All right, so that's what we've been doing. Now let's dig it a little bit more to the plans for the next few years. What's driving those plans? So we saw a little bit of what people are predicting. Well, why? Why are they predicting it? So we asked questions about, well, what is driving your plans? The first thing that we looked at is, well, what are our customers asking for? Is that driving the decisions and the type of content that we're producing? And I think that we are probably in a perpetual, the number one answer is always going to be that customers are asking for content that's more searchable. That the number one complaint that I hear about customers from customers about content everywhere, regardless of industry, regardless of type of content, is that they can't find the information they're looking for. There's too much. There's not. It's not well indexed or searchable in any way. And so I think we're in this age of the internet where we're adding gazillions of pieces of information to the internet on a daily basis around the world. This is probably going to be our number one customer demand, of looking for how do we make our content more findable. We see that even in the recent North America conference, we had an entire track, a full day of sessions in one track about how do we develop taxonomies, how do we make our content more searchable, and so forth. So I think this is one thing that people are really trying to figure out. But the second one is the one to really look at. I think that seems to be this little piece that doesn't fit what we've already just talked about. 46% of the people are saying, of the respondents are saying, our customers are asking for videos. But that number of how many expect to be doing something with videos, that number is about 12% of content is expected to be in videos, and yet we see this big demand for video content. So I think, Mark, as you said, potentially maybe these videos are being taken out of the technical communication group per se, and maybe being developed someplace else in order to meet these demands. And maybe we need to add some questions to the next survey to find that out a little bit more. The third one, the customized or personalized content, also that fits that dynamic delivery. So we do see that the customer demands seem to be driving, at least some of our predictions. Mark, you wanted to say something? No,
just to say on video, it's also, I think, not everybody's comfortable doing videos. It's really a new phenomenon. That also might be why you sort of need different people working on that video side of it. I mean, I think it's almost like a different kind of person who's comfortable describing material and text and doing a video and talking. So I think I think that's just it may actually need a different group, or it may be in the same group, but it just needs different people. That might be why we're seeing that mismatch over here also. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, other things to look, just draw attention to the things that we've talked about. 33%, close to 33% of people demanding content for their mobile devices. So that is something that we need to be taking a look at still. But then lower things like the opportunities to generate content themselves, that explains our previous slide of where we're not really looking at user-generated content. Not many people are doing it, but we also don't have a high number of customers asking for it right now. So I think in general, our customer demands seem to be driving what we see in terms of the future, except for potentially that video piece. What else is is driving things, of course, is our business requirements. So most people are saying, well, you know, a lot of this is that we have to keep up with customer demands and expectations. So the slide that we just saw, you know, certainly is driving, you know, the business is making sure that we're going towards that. But then we have some other things that are driving our goals as well, of just simply keeping up with the Joneses, right? Keeping up with what's everybody else doing? What are the trends? I think that's of course why so many people are on this webinar, and why you know, they contribute to the survey and so forth, is to see, well, what are the trends? Are we staying up with it? Are there things that we should be doing that we're not, that other people are doing? So that's certainly a driver. And of course, that third one of, I guess, another perpetual problem of we're being asked to do more with less. So as we take a look at, you know, some of these strategies, moving to structured authoring, moving to XML, has certainly a sales point to it of potentially you could do more with less, that you can reuse content easier, and you know, those types of things, maybe save some translation dollars, and you know, that type of thing that would fit with this other business requirement. So I think these definitely explain, you know, what we're seeing in terms of the predictions.
Yeah, I would have thought competitors, the competitors providing better information, or, you know, competitive freshes would have been a higher number over here, but it isn't. It either means it's not a factor, or it's just everybody is still struggling with trying to get to that next level, so they're not there yet. But
yeah, potentially, their competitors aren't doing anything differently than they are, or potentially they don't have the time to find out.
Everybody's struggling, so which may be the answer there. But
yep, exactly. So with those demands and those requirements and everything else we've seen, we asked the question, well, what is your number one, you know, content strategy? What are you really going to be working toward? And interesting that number one, which has remained the number one for a few years now, is improving our support for mobile devices. So we got 40%. Potentially, it's that number is very close to the number that said we don't have a mobile strategy. You know, we had the 49% that was saying that they're just doing responsive design, and then we had that 41% roughly that said we don't have a strategy. So maybe this is the, you know, one-to-one correspondence here of we don't have one and we know we need one, and so that's our number one goal here. But a lot of these other strategies do fall in line with some of the predictions then. This provide dynamic delivery system, you know, being the second highest one here as part of their content strategy. So we're potentially that jump that's being predicted in terms of dynamic delivery is certainly being worked on here with people with their content strategy. We still have quite a significant number of people working just to go towards that structured content, topic-based content, at 38%, which might go hand in hand with the other one that it's tied with, that change the authoring environment. So as we go to structured topic-based content, we may need to change what tools we're using as well. And then everything else, you know, kind of falls off after that. So, but I think that, again, we're seeing at least people are predicting what they're working on, that the strategies are in line with what they're saying where they should be in 3 years. Now this is an interesting graph that again hasn't necessarily changed a lot over the last couple of years, but this was, okay, forget the 3-year plan. Let's just talk about the next year. How much content do you expect that you will be delivering in an electronic medium in the next year? What percentage of your content that you deliver will be electronic? And to me, it's really kind of interesting. You kind of got a big chunk here at one end of, okay, almost all of it, 40% say almost all of it's going to be just electronic. And then the next one is just a small bit of it is the next highest one, 22% at this, less than a quarter of it is going to be electronic. And then the middle ones are that lower aspect that kind of divide things out. But it's interesting to me to see that kind of bookend of either we're all in or we're not in terms of what we expect in the next year. So
I'm
although
surprised
we
there's even a small amount that does nothing electronically. That is sort of a surprise to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's interesting to me also because we look at the predictions for print, right? That print prediction keeps going down and down and down, less and less and less. So, the predictions for how much of their content's going to be in print was, in that 25% range and so forth, and yet that's not matching really the next year. Of course, that was a 3-year plan. So, okay. Where do we expect the content to be delivered? This is very similar to the earlier slides, but just as a kind of a reminder of where do we expect people to be delivering. Websites, whether we're delivering that in topic-based content or even PDFs on a website, that wasn't really specifically expressed, so that could be anything that we're delivering content via some kind of a website versus a help system or electronic PDF being distributed in another way, not just necessarily the website. And then there we see our dynamic delivery coming in at that 4th place and kind of those top almost 50% or more being the way that we're delivering our content. And then again, we just drop everything else off from there. So I think that's in line with everything that we've already said. I don't know that we need to belabor it, but what I'd like to do is say, well, how do we, let's take a little bit more look at the publishing formats per se, not just the delivery mechanism. So if we take a look at this now breakdown from that kind of high level one I just showed you into each of the individual formats, what this is showing you, and it's a very complex graph and it takes a while to stare at this, is how much of your content is being delivered in a specific type of output. So if we look at 100% of the content being that pink line, we've got about 1/3 of people delivering all of their content in PDF, 1/3 of them in HTML responsive and HTML XML. Those are big things where this is where the majority of our content's being delivered. And then we see the big lines, which is that 25. The other big lines are the 25% or less than 25%, where we see that being big things like video is not. Again, we continue to see that's most of our content's not going there, but we wouldn't expect most of our content to be going there. And then help also being a high one in that particular area. This one, like I said, it takes a little bit of time to interpret, but what I want to do is just show you, let's compare a couple of key formats from last year to this year and look at the change. So, and the bottom line is the response to this question just 1 year ago, and then the response to it this year, and look at the changes that we're seeing. So in terms of responsive HTML, so it's viewable on your mobile device, it's reformatting itself to be more readable and so forth on your phone. We see that jump there now from 22% last year saying that most of their content was responsive to 35% saying most of their content was responsive. So that I think is a really good trend to see, that we're people are making that their strategies work to start to have a plan for their mobile deliveries, and we see kind of that corresponding decrease in the less than 25% is responsive. 28% last year, 11 or 12% this year. So people are getting that content moved over into a responsive situation. Look also then at PDF, whereas last year 42% of people said all of our content's being delivered in PDF to only 30% this year. So we are seeing again that trend that people are predicting of we're going to have less content in PDFs. We're seeing that happening as well there. And then this is that disturbing trend with video where that's actually now decreasing. And so we're continuing to watch that, but 67% has said they had 25% or so of their content in video. It's going down, and yet if we look at then the next line over 26 to 50%, that also went down. So we have a much larger number, and we're not doing video at all, and just a slight growth in the couple of the 50 to 75 and the 90 to 91 to 100. So the overall trend here in videos, we're seeing year over year of just less content in video at all. And then XML, which of course could produce PDFs, which could produce HTML. So this is more of that kind of format. What are we using as our source content? But we see that continued growth in the pink line of more and more people are putting all of their content into XML. But we also see, interestingly, an increase in the bottom two numbers as well. So I'm not quite sure what happened to our middle people there. They abandoned it, or
to the middle.
yeah, exactly. Some went ahead and put it all in, and some seem to have abandoned it a little bit. So
I think the significant trends are probably the early part, responsive HTML. I think that is a fairly big jump that went up, and I almost see that as the opposite of PDF. I mean, I think those are replacement medium, and we've seen earlier that people are moving, when they move away from PDF, what are they going to? They're moving to some kind of responsive approach, and that I think is showing that happening. I mean, you're seeing a reduction in PDF, as you know, and you're seeing a almost corresponding increase in HTML responsively. So that I think is significant. The video is a little hard to predict, but there's actually a significant amount are now saying we do a lot of our stuff in video. I mean, it's just almost nothing. It's gone from 3.5% to 6%. Well, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, the rest of it the rest of the trend, and I think people are just not comfortable with it yet. And XML, I don't know what happened to the middle there.
Well, we got a little bit of that on the HTML. Yeah. So, okay, yeah. Okay, so last few slides just really of, okay, well, how are you going about doing this? So here's what your demands are. Here's what your future. You're predicting what are your challenges, what are the things that you need, that you're doing. And so the first question is, are you ready? And this has been a continued increase in the number of people who say no. And I kind of laugh, and in a way it's actually not a good thing, but we have seen over the last few years that the number of people who are saying we're not ready for all of these changes has steadily increased. And the category that's going down is the don't know. So they're moving from don't know to saying, nope, we're positive we don't know. We're not ready. We're positive we're not ready. Versus that number that's saying that they're ready is actually the one that's being relatively consistent from year over year. We're just seeing that increase in people saying, nope, we're not quite ready. So what is the problem? What is the shortcomings? Well, these are the things that I think we would all. We've already been talking about that. Searches, we need to improve our searches. We need to figure out what content we actually need to deliver. That 52%, we have so much content people can't find it, is one of our big shortcomings. Our content doesn't support our customers' needs. So that whole first column, the highest number of percentages, really all have to do with our users. We're not giving our users what they need, or if we are, they can't find it. So, that's something that to say, well, we're not necessarily ready to do something. I think what we're hearing is that it's because we have to clean this up in order to move to these newer technologies. We need to have the plan for how are people going to search. We need to have the plan for, what content we're going to actually move forward and what content we're going to abandon, because we have so much, and those types of things that we need to be able to do that before we're going to be ready. I think is really what this is showing us. Barriers to doing that, typical, right? Things that again, these haven't really changed year over year. It's that whole problem that we all have as managers. We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough budget. We don't have the right tools. If we scan down a little bit, those are the things that you're going to hear over and over again in terms of our barriers. We don't know how to maybe write the content or design the content appropriately. And of course, there's that high, our teams are resistant. So, we want to do what we've always done. But I don't think any surprises here in terms of what those barriers are. Those barriers translate immediately into needs. So what do we need? We need more time, we need more resources, we need more funding, we need more training, right? These are the things that we would hear year over year to address our needs and help us be ready to make the changes that we are predicting. Interesting on this slide, just one thing that increased a little bit was the executive buy-in. It went up. The line of popularity and everything, which I think is telling of people going, we need, realizing that they're not going to be able to do it necessarily as a grassroots change, that they've got to get the executives to understand what the issue is and help them meet these other needs, the time and the resources and the funding and so forth, in order to make a move. So I think, Mark, you were going to talk about these last couple of slides that have to do more with conversion of, okay, we're having a problem with all this content. We've seen that that's the thing that they've identified of, well, we need to redo it for search, we need to redo it for the amount of content, we need to rewrite and so forth. And so it looks like from this graph that most of them are trying to do that, in their conversion strategies, in-house. And yeah, so you were going to talk about that.
Yeah, so I know it's supposed, this is, I guess there's a little bit of bias in when I talk about this, but it's just like, it's funny, you see in the last few slides, the constant, there's not enough time or enough resources, and yet only 10% of respondents here are thinking about outsourcing any of this kind of work. I mean, they're over half of them are going to do this in-house, and half of them are going to rewrite content. And the reality is, well, first of all, rewriting should be part of the strategy, because it's very likely that you don't have everything you need, or some of the materials you have, and legacy materials are old and outmoded and not really used that much, and that material should be rewritten. But the reality is that, when you start looking at what how much of it should be done, how many people are really thinking in terms of converting in-house, it's really just, it's just at odds with what we spoke about before. Reality is that this number has not changed very much over the last few years. That is the answer you keep on getting, and I think that's partly is maybe education that needs to be done, and what's concerning is that this often is the roadblock to moving ahead, because once people start looking, panic at, oh, we got to do all this stuff, and let's postpone this for a little while. So I think that's an area, well, I personally think we should do more education on. I think this automating legacy conversion certainly should be a big piece of this, and that's another thing that really holds people internally, because starting to build these automation processes and getting that done is a fairly major task. Most companies internally don't really have the skills or the technology to really do this very effectively. So all these things are unfortunately really holding things back, and there are answers. I mean, I also put the perspective, if you're going to build a new office complex, you're probably not using your own in-house architects, you're probably bringing people in to do that. Let's go on to the next slide, which is really sort of relates very close to this. What are the conversion challenges? Well, number 2 is insufficient staff, yet you want to do it internally. Content is not well structured. Well, the reality is people were not thinking about structuring content when most of the materials were being developed. So the materials, and a lot of times useful materials are 5 years or even 10 years old. People weren't thinking of those ways. So most of it is not going to be well structured, which leads to, oh, we're going to have to rewrite it all, the previous slide. So there are strategies not to rewrite, even if material is not well structured. So I think that really needs to be thought about. Unfortunately, lack of budget is not really the big issue, which means if you have insufficient staff and lack of budget is not the big thing, then there should be approaches to do this. Lack of knowledge of a conversion process, well, you know, Dawn and I talked about this. Comtech and DCL need to do a better job of fixing that, and we're happy to do that, and we'll do that over time. And the negative experience of automated conversion process is, you know, it keeps on coming up. But you know, if you had a negative experience a few years ago, technology has really shifted a lot over the last few years. The capability to do things has shifted a lot of things. So but fortunately, that's not the big thing. I think the big piece is still those two items: insufficient staff and content not well structured. I think there are solutions to that. I think that's all I've got on this, Dawn.
All right. Yep. So I think you've, yep. We're ready for our questions. We just, as Mark just said, you know, we Comtech and DCL are here ready to help you in those moving those plans if you need us, and we're ready for questions, Marianne.
Okay, we have a number of questions, and I do want to also suggest feel free to keep adding to them via the question dialog box. So one question, back in the beginning when we were talking about XML authoring, could you speak to whether or not the numbers are skewed higher toward XML authoring because of the CIDM, and DCL tends to work with and promote companies using DITA? Or do you think these numbers reflect a larger industry outside of the responses?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. Certainly the invitation to go out to participate in the survey is limited to our mailing list. So there's that potential, I would imagine, to be skewed because of the work that we have done. There's independent things like DITA writer Keith Shangaley Roberts does a kind of constant tracking of companies that are in DITA and continues to see that increase in his tracking. So he's a little bit different, but he's also associated with STCMS as well now. So we can only comment on what on the people that we see and hear about. But I do think that it may not be as pronounced, but I do still think that there is that trend more towards XML, different industries, maybe not towards DITA per se, but different industries developing their own language using XML of how they communicate their content and so forth. I think it remains a growing area, but I think it's a valid point that we could be skewed towards the higher because of who we reach.
I mean, I would say it is skewed, but it's a similar audience that are going through for 7, 8 years, and we've been watching trends in there. So I think the same, same biases would be there, and even in our audience and people who we're talked to, I think Comtech also it includes people who are not quite ready, have not been there yet, or just studying or interested. But yes, it's the people who are we'll never get there, we're not interested, we're not doing. Those are probably not those people not represented in the survey.
Thank you. Back when you were talking about formats, where would you place augmented reality?
Well, it's something that we could certainly add to the survey. I think it hasn't been on the survey up to this point because we haven't heard a lot of people talking about it. If we look at like our our conference and so forth, we tend to have, for the last couple of years now, we've had a couple of presentations coming in on augmented reality. So it may be something that we need to start taking a look at. What I suspect is, honestly, is that just going back to our distribution again in our what industries are being represented, that we still may see a fairly low amount with the industries that are participating in our survey, because a lot of, from software documentation perspective and so forth, that's not something that people are really exploring much. It's going to be more in the industrial, the heavy equipment manufacturing areas and so forth, which were about 20% of our survey respondents this year. But it's certainly something that we could look at adding moving forward, because I've certainly seen an increase in interest in that area.
And I would agree. I've seen an increased interest really over the last couple of years, but it's very slow, but it's starting to be there. So I think that's an important question for next year.
Thank you. Okay, another question. Do you think that structured authoring is finally reaching the maturity of implementation to actually deliver on dynamic publishing?
Yeah, I actually do think that that's part of why we're seeing people now start saying that that's part of their strategy, is that until they got their content well structured and reuse mechanisms in place that would help the drive the dynamic delivery, they really couldn't do much with it. So the demand might have been there for custom solutions from the audience, but they really didn't have a way to do it until they were able to get their other content in place. And so we see that, I think in the survey that there's a significant portion of people now who are using XML, who have been now for years, just based on the trends and so forth. And so I think they've got, I think maturity is a good way to put it, that there is now a level of comfort and good structure and so forth in place that would actually make the dynamic delivery meaningful.
And I think the availability of technology has also made a difference. I think now the focus on artificial intelligence and pulling things together, machine learning. So all the chat boxes, all those technologies are coming together now where people are comfortable in expecting things to be much more dynamic rather than getting a PDF file and that's what you get. So I think all that is coming together at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm not sure on this, so you may not want to quote me on this, but I think 7 years ago when we were first starting this survey too, well, dynamic delivery wasn't even a question back then because we didn't have the tools weren't there either. So it's not just a level of maturity in terms of the content, but also that there's now ways to actually make it happen. That we've got some good tools out there on the market that people can use to make it a reality.
Mark, this might be a question for you, at least to begin with. What does automated legacy data conversion mean?
So what I'm hearing is, and I mean, this is what I think people needs. What we do is not just, it's not just take legacy data and move it over and just retag it. That's what was done. That's the traditional way of doing things. But today, a lot of times you're pulling information from many different places, or updating it, or checking it, or comparing it to databases. And I haven't heard a term augmented, but that's what I would say it means. That sounds like a good term for it. And I think that relates back to what we were saying before, and the concerns of, well, we're going to have to rewrite content because it's not quite where we want it. This concept of being able to add information as you do a conversion process and pull information from other places means that a lot of times you can do that quote rewriting automatically and fill information together. So that's what I think the term means. Dawn, have you heard the term? Or
Well, I think I think that's, I think you described it well.
All right, thank you. Do you have a sense for how many tech comms teams survey their customers and then use that feedback to guide their content plans?
Well, I will say that, I teach a lot of classes. Most of you know that. And so, most of those classes have some lesson within them about the importance of being able to talk to your customers and get that information, whether that's through surveys or direct observations or interviews or those types of things. And it continues to be a surprise, and maybe it shouldn't be to me, of how few people actually do have the ability to do that, or the time to do that might be an aspect of it as well, even though it's very important. But we hear, I hear a lot about, well, we're not allowed to talk to users. And that's, again, why I've tried to point them to things like the discussion forums and so forth to try to learn. So in terms of an actual percentage, this is more of a gut feeling. I have no real survey data to say this, but just based on kind of my informal, the number of people in my classes and what I keep hearing, I would say that we're talking maybe a third of the people that I've encountered have good relationships with their customers, where they can survey them on a regular basis, or they have maybe an annual survey or something like that, or they have customer advisory boards, that type of thing. So there's really a significant portion of people don't have that direct contact. They're getting it from marketing or tech support or something that's saying, oh, we're getting too many calls about this, or people are saying this about your content, and we're not getting direct feedback. It's something that I would really like to see changed for everyone.
Okay, we still have a few more questions that folks have submitted. Can you speak to any suggestions you might have in terms of getting folks to move from a book approach to documentation to more of a task-oriented approach?
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
Suggestions on getting people to move from a book approach to documentation to a more task-oriented. I wonder if
task and topic-oriented content. Well, I don't know that it necessarily has to be data, right? I mean, and it's certainly we both of our companies help people move to data, but that's not really the need here, and I don't really interpret the question that way either. Of that, we have to start with the reality. And I think it's always been true, but it seems that more and more people are starting to understand it, is that people don't come to our manuals. The majority of people do not come to our manuals and read them cover to cover. They're coming because they have something that they need to do, and they couldn't figure it out on their own, and there was nobody around to ask, and so they've come to the manual as a last resort, and they want that topic that answers their question. They don't want the entire book-based approach. They just want to be able to get to that single topic, and that's always been the case. But that move from then a documentation mindset to a topic-based mindset, and specifically a task-based mindset, is starting there with the task. What is it that my users want to do? Why are they coming to the documentation? Are they looking to troubleshoot? Are they looking to do a specific thing that maybe they don't do on a regular basis? What is it that why do we believe people are coming to our content? And we start with that. We start with the tasks. We write those instructions first, and then that's not to say that we don't need conceptual or reference information, but then we have to look at those in terms of what task does it support. Are we just giving concepts and reference material like we do in a book just to make the transitions good, to make it, oh, here's an introduction to this content that you should know about? Or is there really something that it's directly supporting? And really think about, if we're going to make it task oriented, to say, well, this is the task. How does this reference information support the task? How does the concept support the task? Is it necessary to support a task. And in some cases it is. I mean, I want to emphasize that sometimes the task is I have to design a system, and therefore I need to know what all of these different pieces and parts do in order to be able to design the system. So if we understand that's the task, then it's all about how do we write that content to support the task? How do we organize the conceptual information to support the task? But we're not worried about the whole transitions and making it really book-based, because people are going to be in and out. And that's the big difference between a book and a topic, is to realize that people are just coming in. It's that concept of, for Mark Baker, every topic is topic one, right? Or every page is page one is his tagline there. It's that they haven't read all the other content. They're coming into this individual topic. So the book-based mentality of, oh, you've already read this, you've already, we can assume certain knowledge or understanding isn't necessarily the case. So we have to rethink how we write topics with that in mind. I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of it's a big question, and we only have so much time. So hopefully that's a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a big question, but it's also, I mean, it requires a mindset to separate out the different pieces so that you're not interleaving. I mean, I know from when we're converting materials, a lot of what we do, like when we're converting data or other topic-based approaches, is taking things apart. And a lot of times, there's things, people have gotten used to working together where things lead to other places and you assume things. And so that's the biggest piece of identifying what doesn't really need to be in that topic, and it can be moved into another piece. And there's a lot of mindset involved here, but it's doable. It's doable. It's teachable.
We have a lot of comments and questions around video. So, similar comments are coming in about production costs for video. While costs have gone down with some new tools, businesses still perceive that video production is time-consuming and expensive. Do you have any recommendations on how we can encourage businesses to produce videos when there is this perception?
Yeah, I think it is an interesting perception, and it is at least changing somewhat. I know when I was earlier in my career, the idea that, oh, if we're going to create a video, it has to be, it has to compete with Star Wars or something like that, with production quality and voice talent and actor talent and seamless editing and all of those types of things. And then with YouTube and people being able to put whatever videos they want to in whatever shaky, horrible format and so forth that they want to out there, I think that's helped bring down the expectations off of that Star Wars quality. But there's still, we have a company reputation. We need to have a certain level of quality, and it's that definition of quality that really has to be well established. And the best thing that I can really encourage in terms of getting people to understand that there's a little bit more tolerance for video quality than maybe we're even giving credit for is to do user studies and have people search Google for how to do something at your company and see what videos are out there, and do the studies that show the users are going to those videos, whether or not you produce them or not, because that's their preference. And it doesn't matter that that's not the highest quality video, they're still going there first over your content. Assuming that that's true, but it's what I've seen a lot of. And so that taking a look at, okay, what is that level of quality? Can we define a better level than maybe that amateur level, but that could still not be as cost prohibitive? Now, there's still some questions that that are harder to answer, which is, well, if you're doing something in support of a product that changes on a constant basis, it's not necessarily a simple matter of just editing the video. You basically have to reshoot it. Or if you're doing translation, what do you do about that? So there are some cost factors that are going to be very specific to you and your company that may make it a bit more prohibitive. But I would take a look, as my starting point, I would take a look at what videos already exist for your content for your products out there. I bet there are. Take a search, find what contents people are already putting out, your users and so forth, and analyze what level of quality is in those, and what would it take for you to do something better than that, that maybe isn't quite as high quality and expensive as maybe your bar currently is at.
I mean, I was just to say that videos don't have to be long, and the place to experiment with 2-minute and 3-minute videos are enough to do a lot of different kinds of instructions. So those don't take long to do. The other things, and I think, and this is where a group that's used to documentation can really help. A lot, what makes a poor video a lot of times is not the video quality, it's just the scripting is not done well, and it's, there's a lot of back and forth and loose time and stuff. So I think, this is not so far away from what people are used to doing. Write a good script and lay it out, and then try it out. And maybe it doesn't come out of, I mean, I would have like the technical people who are working with something, for example, do the video rather than try to do a fancy voiceover. Those are not expected to be, high video quality, and yet could be very helpful and very popular. So I think there's ways of doing this, experimenting on a low budget to get started with.
Well, and I agree with you, Mark, on a couple on several of those points. The length of video is a very important thing. There's a lot of data out. If you just search about how long should a video be, or a technical video be, and so forth, there's a lot of data out there that talks about basically once you've gone past that 3-minute mark, people aren't watching more than 3 minutes anyway. In fact, it's an interesting graph I've seen about if it's a 1-minute video, they watch almost all 1 minute. If it's 2-minute, they watch like maybe 90 seconds, and if it's a 3-minute, they watch maybe 2.5 minutes or something like that. And then as soon as it goes to 4 minutes, they start watching less than it was if it was a 3-minute video. It's like, oh, they're only going to watch 2 minutes of it because it's a 4-minute video. So the longer you get, the less percentage of video that the person's actually watching. And so video absolutely has to be short. I think another one of the points, I was kind of scrolling through all the different questions, another one of the points is, well, video is, when we think about the searchable aspect that the customers were saying that we need to content be searchable, well, video isn't really searchable. You can attach metadata to find the video, but in terms of locating the content within the video, it's hard to do. And that, again, answers, is directly answered by it needs to be very short, so that we're not needing to search through minutes and minutes of video to find the piece. We can get our answer in a minute.
Thank you. And I think we probably have time for one final question. Again, any questions that have not been addressed, we will reach out individually and help work through an answer with you. So when content is rendered in chatbots, how was that area represented in the slides or in the survey? Could you speak to that?
I wouldn't say it was explicitly represented in the survey at all. If people are doing it, maybe they're writing it in some kind of structured authoring because it needs to be parsed so that the chatbot can understand it. But there's not a specific piece of the survey that's asking, as a delivery platform is really where it would come out. And we didn't ask that question, or haven't been asking it. It hasn't been a big factor, but it's another one that we're always open to what should we be putting into our survey of new trends, and so it might be time to add that as a delivery mechanism.
Yeah, and I agree that we should that should be added on. And it's really all in the last year that has become a factor that I've seen over and over again. And again, that has to do with artificial intelligence and natural language processing available to be able to interpret what's going on. So I think going forward will be a factor. So it's time, and it does tie in very, very closely to the rest of what we do when we're dealing with documentation. So yeah, I think for next year.
Thanks. And there are a few other comments that have come in about other suggestions for next year's survey. So I'm sure that we'll address all of those as well in the 2020 survey. So thank you, everyone, for taking part in today's webinar. This is being recorded, and we'll be sending everyone a link to the webinar. The infographic that contains all the responses from the survey is available at the URL located in the chat box. We will also send a link to that infographic in communication after this webinar. And that concludes today's broadcast. We hope to see you in future webinars, and thanks for your interest. Have a great day.